Thank you. Maybe, in fact, I will just give you a minute and a half. Very old exercise, the 9-dot exercise. I think you'll see it may say 1934, so a good number of you have probably seen it before, but just have it's a little bit of a brain teaser. So just have a quick go at that. Well, okay, look, while you're thinking about that, see if you can multitask at the same time, I will start off. My address, as you can see, is applying psychological principles to reshape the future of safety. I will warn you now, my PowerPoint is pretty boring. If you watched it all, you could go to sleep, but I tried to set it up so that you could, if you get a copy of it, have really good notes for the material that I'm going to be covering. Now, what I want to do here is to try and push this idea of applying psychological principles. When you're going to be implementing change, if you can just sometimes be a bit more aware of how people work and how you work for yourself, then frequently you can be more effective at achieving what you want to achieve. So I'll give you examples today of some psychological principles, show you how they can apply, especially related to safety and training. I want to make sure that what I cover, by the way, is practical though. So one of my clear objectives is that when you leave here today, you could go away with some takeaways where you could think, yeah, I could use that. I could actually apply some of that material. So we're going to be touching on a number of psychological principles, and I do mean touching on. For each one of these, I could spend probably a day, no trouble at all. The first one that we're going to be looking at is the process, and we refer it to the process of mental models. Mental models and the impact that they're going to have. So I'll explain more about these when we get to each one. Then we're going to be looking at the good old classic, the power of feedback. But I want to show you how you could use, or get you thinking about how you could use some of the new technology to actually build off some of the core principles of psychology and, again, apply them to training in particular. Imitation and modelling. It's a process that you would all know lots about. As leaders, you would know how important it is when you're leading to actually walk the talk, imitate, and so on. But I want to show you, if you want to introduce new things in training, if you think about some of the ways and underlying things that drive imitation and modelling and make it such a powerful technique for people to be able to learn, then you can really benefit, I reckon, by applying some of those principles. And the final bit that I want to get into, the last bit, is how to use the power of the subconscious. This morning we heard the difference. I think, Hamish, you mentioned just how different it was for people if the focus is on the problem or if they're getting the negatives versus the solutions. Hopefully what you'll find is a good part of my address will link back to some of the material that Hamish was covering and just reinforce many of the comments that he made as well. So those are the areas that we're going to be going into. The 9-dot exercise, that exercise, by the way, triggered the phrase thinking outside the square or thinking outside the box. Okay, now I won't put you on the spot and see how many of you have done it, but let me tell you this. If you tried to solve it by keeping the lines within the square, you just can't do it. Okay, look, here we are. Here's the answer coming up, just like that. See, as soon as you extend the lines so that they go outside of the square, you can solve it the way it's meant to be. But the interesting thing is, many times when you put it in front of people, even though there's no rule saying you have to draw within the square, people seem to apply a rule for themselves. And that's a good example of what is referred to as a mental model. And one of the things about our mental models is many times people are unaware of some of the mental models that they can be working to. So let's just see what I mean. A mental model is a belief, an expectation that we hold about ourselves, what we hold about other people, situations we face, and including safety. Look, I'll give you an example that many of you think, oh, I'm not sure if I hold this mental model. But when I'm working a lot on safety, I forever try and encourage guys to say, do remember this. Safety systems make things safer. They do not make them safe, okay? They make them safer. So traffic lights are designed to make things safer. But what I point out to people, if you really want to stay safe, you've got to keep hold of some bottom line safe behaviours for yourself. Now, you watch people at traffic lights. Go, when you leave here, next time you're driving with somebody, just watch their behaviour. Because you see, the great bulk of people at a traffic light watch the lights, and when it goes green, they go. Okay, what do they do? Green means go. And some of them actually think green means it's safe to go. Okay, green means it's safer to go. Okay, it's safer to go. If you come and visit Wellington or Auckland, by the way, what you can find is if you think green means it's safe to go, some other people think orange means go faster. You know, so we have an orange come up before you're meant to stop. So you put those two together, orange means go faster, green means it's safe to go, bang, you got an accident. And if you look at what people have stopped doing, it's what they would do if there were no lights there, they would have looked. So, you know, safety systems make things safer, not safe. And mental models, often we don't notice that we're holding them. Look, the reason we have to have mental models is they're shortcuts. Our brain couldn't cope if every new system we started to have with a blank sheet, okay? We like to think, oh, I treat everybody, you know, as a new person and I don't have any biases or whatever. It's lovely to think like that, but we couldn't cope. Okay, as soon as somebody meets me, their brain will have automatically gone older white male, and a whole lot of conclusions are just drawn about that, like that. The brain's already jumped to conclusions. We can't stop our brain from jumping to certain conclusions, but we can sometimes slow down and think, hey, what are the mental models that I'm working to? What are the mental models people are likely to hold about me? I tell you, when you say you're a psychologist, I don't say that when I go out to a party. Two things happen, you know, I'm a psychologist. You get, oh, I've got this friend, and then they want to tell you a problem, and you think, oh, no, you know. Or the other thing, psychologists, they're gone, you know, so it's a real party killer. And again, it's just people working to underlying mental models. So we're often not consciously aware of them, and what happens from change, you see, they often make it harder for people to think of alternative ways of doing things. And I'll back that up with a few more comments in here coming up shortly. But what I would like you to see is, this is the catch about a mental model. Once we hold a particular belief, our brain, our subconscious brain, works actively to try and make sure that what we end up experiencing and what we end up seeing and hearing fits in with what we were expecting, okay? And it does it in a whole range of different ways, and I just wanted to highlight the principle. So we're only going to be looking at one way that our brain confirms what we see and hear in line with what we were expecting to see and hear, okay? And this way that we're going to look at is by editing information in and out. And so what I would like you to do in this next one here, I'm going to flash up a slide, and I only want it there for a little bit, so we'll see how quickly it will move off. And I just want you to note what it said and use some of the paper in front of you. The back of the 9-dot exercise would do nicely. And just write down exactly what it says. Now, it's going to be a bit of speed reading. It should be in big print. So just write down, if you'd all look at the screen now, exactly what this says. Oh, too long. That was a bit of a giveaway. Anyway, we'll see how we went. See if I can get this one much shorter. Similar thing, a bit more to read, but we'll see how we do for this one. So I won't leave it there as long as the last one. It is meant to be speed reading. There we go. And we'll just leave that there for a minute. So write down what the other one said. So what did the first one say? Paris in the spring? Yeah. Some of you will have seen the two these stuck in there, by the way. Whoops. Where'd that get to? Paris in the spring. But a lot of the time, especially if you flick it up quickly, what happens is people just read Paris in the spring. The next one, by the way, I probably should have changed it. It's won't work so well with people who are not really familiar with English, but there is an old saying in English, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And for those of you that know that statement, that's what you're likely to have read in this next one, despite the fact that there's two is's, two these, and two ofs. Okay, and our brain just edits that information out. It goes, I don't need that. As adults, we don't read word for word. We read to make sense. This is why, by the way, we're not that great proofreading our own work. Because we just read what we're sure we put on the page. And our brain just fills it in for us. It's good like that. So your brain is editing information. You might think, oh, I'm good, I pay attention and all of that sort of thing. But it edits information. If it thinks you're interested in something, it will let that information through to your conscious brain. Look, if you've just purchased a car that's new to you, doesn't have to be brand new, but you've just got one of these for the first time, you want to see what happens for the next week. You'll see lots of them. There's a hell of a lot more out there the week after you got yours than there was the week before you started. And that's because as you're driving down the street, your brain was seeing all this car going, all the traffic going by, but it goes, oh, I'll have that one. All the rest is on a big drafting gate. Thank you, dump. Most incoming information to the brain is on thank you, dump. Oh, but I'll have that. If you happen to think a staff member is always late, let me tell you this. Once you think that, your brain will make sure you spot every time they're late, but it will actively edit out every time they are on time. Okay, so it's changing things so that you see what you're expecting to see. So we'll keep moving, the other way. Now, the next little video clip that's coming up here, many of you will have seen this, but that's fine. It's still a lovely example of what we're talking about. But I would like you, if you would, to just do the exercise and see how we go. If you haven't seen it, great. But if you have, please just still do the little counting exercise. So we're about to watch the monkey business.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
So what was the answer? How many times? 15, 16 it is. What else happened in there though? The gorilla came across. Now, look, for those of you who haven't seen it before, some of you now might be thinking, what gorilla? Okay? And we're about to show you that not only does the gorilla walk in, but it stops in the middle and goes boom, 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 and yet lots of people, around half of people, don't see it. If they weren't expecting it, they don't see it. But here's a cunning question for you. See, this is slightly different to the original. There were a couple of other changes going on in here that weren't in the original. Can anybody notice something extra different that happened in there? The curtains were changed colour. Were what? Yes, the curtains were red. Okay, the curtains were red, we're going to see it in a minute, and a black player moves. But the interesting thing is this. For those of people who saw the first one but haven't seen this, often their brain will go, oh, I know what happens here. The gorilla walks on, boom, 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 boom. I spotted it, got it, and off it goes. But they don't see the colour change, so you did particularly well to pick up the colour change. They just often don't see it because they thought, I know what I'm looking for, that's what they see. I forever say to people in safety, if they're going to do a hazard and identification, if they just think, oh yeah, I know this job, and do a quick flick, 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 what will happen is their brain will get them then to see the hazards that they were looking for, but if they hadn't done it thoroughly, it can miss others. Okay, so for those of you who missed the gorilla and missed the colour change, let's have a look, if we could, at the rest of this clip. It'll speak for itself.
The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
Okay.
Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Great book too, by the way. But the other interesting thing is too, if you missed the gorilla, do realise this. When you were looking at the screen, the gorilla walks right into the middle of the screen. So it's not like it snuck in on one corner. It was right in front of you. But if you weren't expecting it, the brain just doesn't see it. Okay, and you can think, surely it can't do that. Look, in New Zealand and lots of places overseas, motorists, car drivers don't see people on motorbikes. Okay, they just don't see them. They'll say, I didn't see you. For heaven's sake, the person had a headlight on, a bright yellow suit, and still someone pulled right out in front and took them down, and they're going, didn't see you. Didn't see because they weren't looking for it. Look, I've done a little bit of work in Vietnam and visited, wonderful country, really enjoyed it. I tell you, the one thing that doesn't happen there, their road safety's not fantastic, but they get very few where a vehicle pulls out and takes a motorbike down, just pulls out in front of them, because the main thing you're expecting to see is motorbikes. You know, so once the brain starts thinking, oh, it's editing, and it edits amazingly powerfully. Look, this next clip I put in for a little bit of humour, but it just highlights to you how unobservant people can be, even when you see people go, I was there, I saw that, I knew that. We're not interested in paying attention to every little detail, okay? And this next one they're going to put up is known as the door illusion, so we'll watch the video.
The door study.
The door study, sorry.
This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions.
Notice he's got
Watch
a
closely
maroon
as two
coat
people
on
carrying
as well.
a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else.
Look at that.
Like
He's gone
many
to
of
a
the people
green
in this
coat.
study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else. This study was among the first to demonstrate that change blindness can occur outside of the laboratory.
So
This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin and is copyrighted.
And look, you can find on YouTube, by the way, lots of other examples of that sort of thing. But this idea of change blindness too, one quick example, just how it relates to safety. You see, I do work in New Zealand for a lot of power companies. And fortunately now, they've changed the process. Back in New Zealand, which can get wild and stormy and whatever, linesmen used to go out and fix lines in all sorts of weather, okay? And now we've realised some of those conditions are unsafe. So they started saying to the guys, if the weather's bad, you actually, you're not to work and whatever. And it was as though the guys were not paying any attention and not doing things. But to tell you what was happening was this. See, if you go out and the weather's reasonably wild and you're working, if the storm slowly gets worse, it can get to a state now, if they just climbed out of their van, if they hadn't been out there working in it, if they climbed out in their van, they'd go, this is nuts, I'm not working here, because it would have seemed as wild as it was. But if the weather's just creeping up on them, then often people don't notice. The brain's just not paying attention. But let's bring it back to here, the training side, the impact of mental models at work, by the way. Once we work in an industry, our brain will think, this is how it's done. This is how it's done. And here's a real irony. The more successful organisations are, the stronger these mental models become. So we are really successful. We're really successful, so this is how it's done. Okay? And that can lead us to being blind to change. And there's a very old saying, it's certainly not from me, but this one. Past successes of an organisation do not predict well future success. And it's got down there, when there's a change in the operating environment, there's this idea everything returns to zero. Newcomers can come in and just totally change the way things are done. Okay, so this idea, it's often called back to zero. And back to zero, I'll give you some old examples where people miss what was happening. And I've put in some real old ones here, and we'll look at some modern ones. But the Swiss watch industry, back when I was much younger, absolutely dominated the market. But it was all about gears and diamonds and stuff like that. So when the quartz watches came along, the really successful Swiss companies, their managers didn't see this could be the new future for watches, because they knew all about watches. You know, you should have seen the slump in the market because it was some Japanese and American companies that picked up and started the early movements with the quartz watches. They just didn't see it coming. IBM, it's lovely to see that clip of some of the old computers. I can remember the Commodore 64s, that really shows my age and whatever. I can remember all of that thing. But early on, IBM didn't see any future for personal computers. They had the potential to have dominated the market, didn't see it coming. And that same thing happens time after time. Let's look at the recent examples, Skype and WhatsApp. Okay, you look at the number of phone companies who've gone, we're a phone company, we've got this market, we can make all this money and da-de-da-de-da, and suddenly blindsided by, why should we pay all that money? We'll just communicate by Skype once we've got the internet, you know, and yet they were in a position to have grabbed that and run with it. They just didn't see it coming. They didn't see it coming. Airbnb. Okay, you look at the number of people who now book via Expedia, Airbnb. You know, if you're a hotel and now people on the Airbnb, it's changing the market out there absolutely massively. Absolutely massively. So Uber for taxis all around the world, there's this huge fuss. They're undercutting us, they're doing that and they're doing this. It's interesting, back in New Zealand, quite a number of taxi drivers are now also doing Uber. But unless people can stop and think, our world's changing, how are we going to adapt? So the challenge is, when we've got mental models that are locking us in, what can we do about that? So changes in the oil and gas industry. You know, oil and gas, without a doubt, is a real leader in safety, and you want to stay that way. But it's great to see the organisers of this conference have realised, unless ways can be found to adapt to what's happening out there, especially the change if oil prices are going to stay at that sort of lowish level that they are at the moment. How are we going to adapt and make sure that whatever we do still keeps people safe? So, implications of the mental models when leading change. If you're trying to generate change, I'd love you to consider doing this. If you're going to hold discussions with people about how things could be done differently in terms of training, just give them some examples. Or, sorry, that one back there we'll go to. A good way to start is the same sort of thing that I've just shown you. You can get heaps off Uber or whatever, but just reminding people, hey, if we keep looking at things this way, we can just not see the broad potential. So you can have those sorts of discussions. Encourage people to ask themselves and others questions. So questions, for me, powerful way to influence. How could we stop doing whatever and still achieve great safety? You know, what would happen if we didn't do this? And if we didn't do this, how could we still make sure safety was great? Are there changes in technology that could allow us to change the way we do the task or change the way we do the training and still keep it safe? And we've heard about the move towards the digital type world, you know. And if you look at the speed that that's going, a whole lot of e-learning at the moment is on computers, but I tell you, it's going to be phones that are rapidly replacing computers. So unless we've thought, what are the apps that we're building, you know, to deliver our training, it's those sorts of things that are happening and happening at an incredible rate. How can we reduce the time it takes to train people? You know, it was great to hear you're looking at, hey, we can use the digital, but we've still got to keep that practical training and keep the practical training. How can we capitalise on people's use of smartphones for training purposes? I'll give you an example that occurred to me when I was thinking of this. I think of the times I've sat in heliports waiting to fly off somewhere. A whole lot of time people just sitting, not doing much. Imagine if up on their phone came this thing now from the work, which was a little questionnaire related to the flying bit that they're about to do, some of the safety training. You know, and people are expected to do it and randomly shuffle around. You know, these people are there, they've all got smartphones, fill it out on the smartphone. Doesn't matter if they have somebody next door to them, look if they can get the right answers, because that's getting their brain engaged about some of the things. So if you're thinking, how do we keep training alive? Often there's ways we can do that with the new technology. Stimulate people's creative thinking by giving examples related to some of the questions that you're asking. So look, the mental model side's really important and powerful, but let's look at this other one here. I put this in, and if we get time, we're covering it at the end. Sometimes you might just want to get the discussion going and get ideas going. But if you ever really want something implemented that you're hot on and think, hey, this would work well, then we're going to look at a planning by working backwards a bit later on. Let's look at this principle here. Feedback changes people's behaviour. When you're in training, you know that absolutely. And positive feedback, people are more likely to keep doing things. Punishment, negative feedback, they will stop doing stuff if they start getting negative feedback. There's no doubt about that. Well-established principles. And as part of that, this old saying here, people respect not what managers expect, but what they inspect. Because inspection links to feedback, okay? I often also say the easiest way to inspect is to ask a question. You know, questions that makes them hugely powerful for managers, because when you're asking a question, basically you are often inspecting. So then let's have a look at some of this for the power of changing people's behaviour. The likelihood of people breaking a rule decreases significantly as you increase the likelihood of them getting caught. Okay, it's a well-established principle. So, well-placed CCTV cameras have been shown to reduce crime. You know, you put cameras around the place, suddenly, and there is some evidence that the crime just then shifts to another area, But as soon as you've changed the odds that somebody thinks they'll get caught, you change the behaviour. What about the good old classic? This one, the classic is coming in a minute. But look, I've seen this really change drivers' behaviours, GPS tracking. You know, you should see how quickly people will change their behaviour once it starts getting monitored. Fixed speed cameras. They stop people speeding. I'm a bit cheeky. I go for a few hundred metres. You know, isn't it lovely to see people who know where the camera is? They go down the road, the brakes go on, slow down, go past a bit, time to go again, you know. So, it's nice to go to countries like Australia that put up huge signs warning you of speed cameras. I think that's really helpful. But if you want to drag the overall speed down, it's not. You know, sure, you can control it for a little bit. But if you go the New Zealand way, let me tell you this, and it didn't bring a lot of popularity, but by combining unmarked cameras and vans, you know, so just parked on the side of the road, done that, lots of hawks and radar things and police vehicles and so on, they very effectively drove down the speed within the New Zealand, on New Zealand roads. And they know that because they do passive measuring. And between 2000, and they really started blitzing it in 2003, there has been an average drop on the road of around almost 10 kilometres an hour. It mightn't sound like much, but it really has changed things hugely, and deaths have come way down, and accidents have come way down. People go, speed doesn't count. Speed does count. You know, speed does count. So you can change people's behaviour by focusing on catching them out. But as we heard earlier, there's some real bad side effects of doing that, because people often respond much better, as we heard, to positive feedback than negative. So it can change behaviour, negative feedback, but there is evidence that if people believe they won't be caught, their behaviour deteriorates, okay? Dutch motorists on German highways. In Holland, there are heaps of speed cameras, just heaps of them. So they control speed very effectively electronically. And so when the Dutch get loose on the German highways, like a rocket, you know, in schools, I know this happens, classroom studies. If you have a strict teacher, you know, you're in trouble. I tell you, you get this well-behaved class until the teacher steps out of it. Then chaos reigns. You know, it's quite amazing to see. Whereas teachers who tend to build up and encourage and whatever, when they leave and then come back in a bit, the class is often still working and doing things. So there are some real downsides from the negative control. So if you're going to implement and take use of the stuff to try and change safety or build it into training, you do need to remember that. Now, here's a good example of how things could be well done. Fonterra, huge New Zealand dairy company, known worldwide, they decided that they were definitely going to put in GPS tracking in their trucks. And many of the drivers early on were very anti it, okay? And what they did, though, the way they managed the process brought that resistance down. And they did it by doing things like this. They put a strong focus on thanking and encouraging good drivers, okay? And it was in one of the other speakers today, that sort of make sure you're giving that positive feedback. It was actually Simon's, that make sure that feedback is ongoing. So they did it like that. Informing all drivers each time there was a situation where the data supported the driver related to a complaint or an accident. See, some of the times now people will go, that truck was just flying. Hadn't seen the truck, but either way they hadn't. And so the impression that they got is the truck was speeding. So they're claiming it was speeding. And the passengers were going, it was speeding. But the data actually showed, no, it wasn't. So suddenly the drivers have got this level of support. So by changing the focus on how they did it, they did a couple of other things that was really effective. They did hold conversations with drivers asking why certain breaches occurred. Rather than we'll just tell them off or we'll send them an email, you've been speeding, da-de-da. Go and have a conversation with them, talk to them. That got many of them to change their behaviours. And then what happened was They gave individual warnings for poor driving and only took stronger action when it was persistent. And by then, they already had the support of the great bulk of drivers. Okay, so you can do things well, but you just need to be thinking of the underlying psychology behind it, or otherwise all the barriers go up and people think, oh, this is terrible and we shouldn't have to put up with this. See, new technology here. The huge reduction in the cost, size and mark performance in little cameras these days means it's possible to give much higher levels of feedback electronically. So it could be used, you know, if you think of it like this, you could use it for safety, you can use it for quality, okay, productivity, they could all be impacted on this. And of course, you can use it to assess how well training's been given. So let's just have a quick look at a couple of these. For safety, you could have, you know, you think of it when I've been off on offshore rigs and also onshore, they barrier areas off and then people get annoyed because some people just keep going through the barriers. Imagine if you knew it was going to be recorded. I tell you, I reckon you would suddenly find compliance just changed, poof, like that. Okay, quite amazing. So, but you could use webcams to record people when they were receiving coaching on a range of things, you see. Imagine this, if you've trained somebody up to have some discussions with staff, so for instance, you wanted to do some training about how well they were doing pre-starts and toolbox talks and those sorts of things, you can actually record it, you know, and then give people feedback on that. The other thing about it too, electronically these days, you think, oh, we're going to get so much information, how are we going to handle it? The one that I had down there, you could actually get some specialised people to analyse it, just give managers some brief feedback on it. So you could use feedback not just to look at what's happening with staff, but how well managers are managing and all sorts of things. When you stop and think, how can we use the new technology? But a brief tip here, by the way, if you were to implement more use of cameras to give feedback, do think about what you would call them. Because let me tell you, the psychological impact of little phrases often does have a huge difference, okay? So, for instance, I often say this to people, zero harm, you say zero harm to people and often they'll think it's unrealistic in this business. But home safely every day, you know, we've heard safely every day here emphasised a lot. That doesn't get the sort of resistance. By the way, when I'm working with organisations on this, I do say this, you want leaders emphasising zero harm, because as soon as you don't have zero as a goal, you've got a goal to harm people. You know, that's the bottom line reality. You know, in New Zealand, we used to do tunnelling, and tunnellers would go, oh, well, looking at the geological format, this is probably about 2 deaths per kilometre. Now, these days, if you went to our wash and said, we're only planning to kill 2 people every kilometre, they would go, back to the planning, boys, you know, back to the planning. So you can't get away with doing that sort of thing now, and it's good. So organisations, they need zero, but individuals, if you get people, whoops, I've gone the wrong way there, but what happens, I would be going for the organisation, they need zero, individuals focus on, let's just focus on going safely home every day. But I tell you, if you use the terms like monitoring cameras or anything like that, anything that could be negative, people will just be turned off them so quickly. So quality review cameras, training assessment cameras, coaching cameras, just be careful what you were to call them. That's just a little brief tip. Imitation and modelling, cover very quickly here because you'll know lots about it, but it's a huge way to change people's behaviours. But this is an interesting one, and having just another grandchild, it's so much fun to do this sort of things. Babies imitate right from the beginning. And my little granddaughter this time needed a hair lip in an operation, and because the hair lip can, or not hair lip, sorry, tongue tie, it can regrow, so you actually want the baby to poke its tongue out a lot. It's not hard to get a baby to poke its tongue out. You just point yours, they poke them back, because they can actually control that action. So you'll see right from the time people are babies, they will imitate and model. Now, what happens here, 80%, time after time, they come up, 80% of all on-the-job training comes via imitation and modelling. Hugely, hugely powerful. And leaders here, you'll all know that. You'll know how powerful it is. Now, when it comes to change, often people will resist change because they can't see it, especially if this is the way it's always been done. And we heard, and I want to pick up on the comment that Hamish made before about with the Sainsbury example of getting it established in one little area and when it was going well, building off on that. So when people see a working model, they'll often be far more willing to adopt it or adapt it and so on. So as a leader, you can utilise that process so easily. So the following examples, there was a wool scouring company in New Zealand. New manager took over and realised, boy, they make a great product, still do, but their ways of doing things were pretty antiquated. And he knew if I just went, hey guys, you're behind the times in the way you do things, he'd just peeve people off. So he didn't. He actually took them for a tour. He said, how long, this was a little country-based, but builds fantastic stuff. How long since you guys have had a look around what's really happening in the industry around New Zealand? Let's go. He even called it a junket. Let's go for a junket. And so he took the leaders and a few staff representatives and a union member, and off they went, union rep, and they went and looked at things around the country. The amazing thing is, when they got back to their local town, the guys were now going, oh, we could do this, and we could do that. And he was thinking, yep, and if I just suggested it, it would have gone down like a lead brick. But now they're telling me, so simple to do, and yet so effective. This one here, EPMU, Engineers, Printing, Manufacturing Union, they wanted to change, get people to change in the printing industry from cleaning using chemicals that are quite carcinogenic and not good for your health to using vegetable oil-based product for cleaning. Far more complex to do, but that's what they wanted to implement. They got on board with the Christchurch Press in New Zealand and joint management got it really working well. And when it was working really well, then what the union did when they were talking to another paper said, you should consider moving to this. Oh no, it won't work. You could never do that. Oh, why don't you just duck down to Christchurch and have a look? Once you've got a model, it's so much easier for people to actually work off. So this one here, imitation and modelling when leading change, again, actively seek out potential models that demonstrate what you're trying to achieve. Send a group of leaders and so on to go and have a look. Encourage them to think, how could we adapt? I loved your comments this morning about grabbing stuff from other areas, that thinking smart. So the two of us, I assure you, Hamish and I had no contact about what we were delivering, but here's where the overlap really shows up. Because you can look at what's happening elsewhere and think, how can we adapt it and get it to apply? So if you think about training, many of the challenges for training are the same. Doesn't matter where you train. You want the good competencies and training focus that's relevant for the task. You want training that engages people from a wide range of ages and cultures. And you want training that gets people to apply what they're learning. And that's the same. Doesn't matter what the industry is, those same principles apply. So then you can think, well, let's look right outside the industry. What is actually happening? Who else are doing things? So you've got this potential to start thinking, if we want to do things differently, what is happening out there? So I put a few ideas up. And I'm sure some of you, I'll go through this quickly because I'm sure you'll already be doing it. But if you want to try and innovate in the safety area, look what other people are doing. Because there's thousands of different safety training programs all around the world, not just oil and gas, some that could be relevant. How are you going to identify the best ones? So, Google it. Go for safety training awards. Not in the oil and gas industry, just safety training awards. Can we learn anything out of that? Obviously, you would look at your own industry, but parallel industries in particular, construction, plant maintenance, all of those sorts of things. You might want to look in different countries. What are different countries coming up with? And just thinking about using what's around. Identify things like this. Hopefully somebody out there thinking about training, OPITO, world standard, and then think, oh, well, what could their papers would be like? Can we get those? Work off, have a look at that. So there's ways you could narrow the search down and still be very effective. This little hint here, if you want to think about using smartphones to really innovate in training, have a look at what some of the smartphone companies are doing. Vodafone in New Zealand has a really effective health program encouraging people to get fit, and it's all tied to their phone, and it's all tied to getting people's naturally competition. You know, reminded me some of the things where I've seen offshore where how many, kilometres can you ride on the bike and one place competes with another. They've taken some of those concepts and just put it into a package, and it's all driven by phones. So there's lots of things that you can do on that regard. So, but I've just looked at the time. I need a double check. I know we started late. Who shall I be looking for? Keep going just a little bit. I'll keep this next bit very quick. Process of turning thoughts into actions. It's a hobby horse area of mine, and I just want to quickly explain to you why focusing on solutions versus problems is so different. And it's related to how we go about making things happen. You see, when we think about something, it feels like our conscious thoughts are driving our actions. But it's an illusion of direct control. Look, if I put this over here and want to pick it up, all I have to do is think, pick it up, give it a click, move along, Ross, you're tight for time. So I do. And if you ask me, I'd say I consciously controlled that. I thought, pick it up, give it a click, that's what happened. But imagine if at a conscious level, while it was there, I'd had to give every instructions. Okay, could my right arm start moving out? Could this leg lift off the floor? Could I turn at the hips? And in my brain, there would have been thousands of separate instructions just to get this and give it a click. So it's not controlled directly. Our subconscious is controlling the action. Okay? It's the subconscious that's controlling the action, not our conscious brain. And when I say the subconscious, it's the part that we're busy working and we're not aware of it. In terms of grunt, the conscious brain's a toy. This is where the powerhouse is. But I just want to leave you with these few little thoughts as we finish. You see, your subconscious works to set rules. Brilliantly powerful, but it's working to rules. And one rule it works to is it works to a picture or an image that the message creates. I'll keep it short. You think of this. Someone's trying in cricket to line up a high ball. It doesn't help if someone screams, don't drop it. Okay, because don't drop it. If you think of that message, the image is dropping the ball. The subconscious goes, you want it dropped, I'm good at that. Any golfers in the room will know if you look down a fairway and happen to think, I hate this hole, I always get the trees, your subconscious is going, we're going for the trees, guys, let's go for the trees. Okay, so that's happening. You think of it, catch it is the call, not don't drop it. Okay, and the same process happens. I'm not going to bite my nails. You know, you tell a young child you're not to suck your thumb, don't suck your thumb. All they're getting is a message of suck your thumb. You know, tell people what to do, because nail biting will continue. Once somebody, you tell a young child if it's biting their nails, hey, hands away from your face, hands away, hands away, hands away, change the behaviour. And for safety, you must never put your hand in there, because if you do, you'll lose your fingers. Is not a good message. Because let me tell you this, they won't do it straight away, most unlikely as an adult human being. By the way, if it's a 2-year-old and they're heading towards a fire or something like that, the last thing you want to go is don't touch the fire when they're 2, because they'll touch it. But as an adult, don't put your hand in there or you lose your fingers. They'll be fine until they either get stressed, that's one time we'll catch them out, and the other time is when they're not concentrating. So I've talked to people after accidents who just, when you're saying to them, how could have you done that? They're going, I don't know. I knew I was never meant to put my hand in there, but that's the wrong message. So there's the whole area of focusing on solutions. When you're writing material for training programs, make sure you are telling people what to do, because as soon as you start telling them what not to do, you are potentially creating problems. But I'll definitely stop there. So thank you.